Okay. I had some people ask me some questions during the break, and I thought I'd take a minute and just answer them for you right now. Yes, yes, no, yes, and no. So if you have any others, why, feel free to bring them up. Years ago, when I was coming from the East Coast to San Diego to my first squadron, and stopped at the Grand Canyon, and it was a real quiet day at the Grand Canyon. There just weren't people around. And I was wandering through this big gift shop. It was probably as big as this room. It was a large gift shop, and there was only one other family there, a father and a mother and a son and daughter. I think the daughter was probably around 13, the boy was about 8. And you know, with an 8-year-old boy in a gift shop, he was just, he was having a wonderful time. You know, rubber tomahawks from New Jersey and all these wonderful souvenirs of Arizona. And you could hear him all over the store. And he was, Dad, oh, Dad, look at these, Dad. Can I have one of these? And Dad was a pro. He'd been at this for a while. And he was just walking down the aisles this way. And no, no. Oh, Dad, can I have one of these? I really like one of these. No, no, no. Oh, Dad, look at these. Oh, these are really neat. Gee, I really like that one. It's good to have one of these. No, no, no. Well, it was obvious that appealing to Dad's good nature was not going to work. And so he did what kids do. He decided to go for guilt. And so the next time he picked something, he said, oh, Dad, oh, I'd really like one of these, Dad. Dad, please, Dad, can I have one of these? Dad, no, no, no. So then at the top of his voice, he says, gee whiz, Dad, you never buy me anything. And Dad, without even missing a step, said, well then, there's no sense starting now. Now, this hour we're going to talk about communication. And I use that story to illustrate how you can eliminate an argument. And there are a couple of elements that I want to go into in this. You see, Dad didn't buy in to this kid's attempt to get him into an argument. And he could have, but he didn't. Now, he didn't say, yes, I have. I've bought you plenty of things. Why, just day before yesterday. He would have bought into the argument. On the other hand, suppose he said, suppose he had no. No, I never buy you anything. Well, that would have agreed with the child. So, see, what people do is they move us on an argument from where they're not making any points to where they figure they can. They work for leverage. They work for a commanding position. And that's what he was going for. All right, Dad, you never buy me anything. What are you going to do with that? And Dad basically said, nothing. Now, he didn't say no, and he didn't say yes. Essentially, what he said was, well, maybe that's true. But if it is, so what? There's no sense starting now. Now, I want to take a minute and talk to you a little bit about arguing, because of the 7 sins of communication, that is by far the most difficult to deal with it, because it's the one your kids will use on you all the time. Kids use arguing on parents because it works. Think about it. If you weigh 50 pounds and you're trying to get somebody that weighs 180 to give in and do it your way, you don't do it by grabbing them by the throat and saying, this is the way it's going to be. You get them, you persuade them. And the way kids do it is they get you to argue. I mean, think of it. If a parent had a child who was 8'4" and weighed 500 pounds, would they have to ask for a cookie? You have a cookie anytime I want a cookie. You don't like it? Ha! So what? So, what we deal with in arguing is the problem that goes along with all kinds of communication, and that's why you're going to hear me talk so much about don't say as much as you feel you need to say. You know, it's an area where you can make a big adjustment and improve things overall. Here's the problem. Suppose that you have, let's say you have a little 4-year-old, lovely little child, just the pride of the family. and it's dinner time. Well, it's dinner time in about 15 minutes. It's just finishing getting it all ready, and here into the kitchen comes this little cherub and says, "Mom, I'm hungry. Can I have a cookie?" Well, what do you say? Well, the normal answer is something like, "No, honey, you can't have a cookie." Now, most parents won't stop there, you see, because they feel, well, you really need to explain yourself to the child. You shouldn't just say no. It's rude. It's abrupt. So they say, "No, honey, you can't have a cookie because we're about to have dinner, and it will spoil your dinner." You ever heard that? It'll spoil your dinner? Have you ever seen a dinner spoil because a kid ate a cookie? Say, "Look what happened to your dinner. Now I got to throw the whole thing out just because you had a cookie." Well, that's the things we say. Anyway, you say, "No, honey, you can't have a cookie because it'll spoil your dinner." And, of course, the child looks at you and says, "Oh, okay," and leaves. Right? Sure. You got a child like that, bring them in. Something's wrong. No, they're not interested in your reasons. So you say, "You can't have a cookie, it'll spoil your dinner." "But I'm hungry." That's what you get. "Well, I'm sorry you're hungry, but we'll eat in about 15 minutes," as though they cared. I'm still hungry. I want something now." "You can't have anything now." "If I don't get something now, I'm going to die." "If you don't get out of the kitchen now, you're going to die." And then they throw a temper tantrum. And you say, "All right, here, have a cookie." Problem is, what have you taught them? Well, you've taught them that if you will come out and harass me and throw temper tantrums, I'll give you whatever you want. Could you imagine going and saying, "Look, honey, I got a new deal for you. If you will bother me, drive me nuts, put me into an early grave, put me on Valium permanently, I will reward you with cookies and cake and ice cream and candy." And the child says, "That sounds like a good deal." Well, the problem is that when you give in, you've taught the child, "Harass me." My advice to a parent who is going to give in is don't hold out at all. Don't argue with them and don't fight and don't resist. The minute they come out of the kitchen, "Mom, could I have a whap?" Give them a cookie. "Here, cookie. Have a bowl of ice cream. Anything you want. Donuts. What else would you like?" Now, the kid's going to end up like a blimp, but you're going to still have your sanity. See? And later on, when you are still in good shape, you can put the child on a diet. But if you teach the child that you're going to resist them, and arguing is one of the ways we resist, then what you teach them is it takes at least 15 minutes for me to crack. So the child knows, I go for at least 15 minutes. I don't even expect any results for the first 15 minutes. I know it'll take that long for them to get hysterical, and then I'll get some results. Now, I say that kind of humorously, but I really mean it. If you're going to give in at the end, don't go through all that hassle. Just give in at the beginning. Just let them know, "I am a cream puff. Anything you want, you got it." See? Or the alternative is, "Well, I would really like them to learn to pay attention to me and not hassle me like that." Good. Then what you do is, if you say no, you stick by it. And if you have to, you stop stirring the cream sauce and you take the little cherub out of the kitchen and to their room or to the living room or to Dad and say, "Would you please watch her for a few minutes?" And he says, "Huh? Huh? What? What's going on?" "No, never mind. Just watch her." Other part of that. We think that if we don't give in to the child and the child finally gets sent out of the kitchen, that we've solved it. Well, we have solved the idea that, believe me, if I say it, I mean it. We're being consistent. But the problem is that kids argue with you not because they win every time. See, not because they prevail. Let's use that word. Sometimes you prevail. "No, you are not going, you're not wearing pantyhose to school. I don't care how many boys in your third grade class are, you're not." See? And you prevail, and they have to go without them. Well, the problem is, we think, well, we won, we taught them. No, because from the child's point of view, that isn't the winning or losing. It isn't who finally gets their way. Okay? That's what you're looking at. But we've got to look at it from their perception. It's like consequences. For them, the idea was the minute I got you to argue, we were on my agenda. I won. From that point, I won. And what I won was I got you to do it my way. Now, if in the end I don't get what I want, okay, I lost. But that's not what's important. What's important from the child's point of view is, can I get you into the argument? Because if I can get you into the argument, then I've got a hope of winning the argument. The dad of the Grand Canyon who said, well then, there's no sense starting now, didn't get into it. There was no way that child could win. So part of communication, and particularly arguing, is to understand that for the parent, you may say, well, I stuck by my guns and they didn't get what they wanted. Yes, and that's important. But what's more important is to learn how not to argue with the child, because from their point of view, they already got you to do it their way. And we're going to talk some about that. I'm going to give some illustrations of how not to argue. I didn't argue with my kids. I really didn't know what I was doing. Very honestly, when I was raising my kids, as I say, I was flying planes in the Navy. I didn't know what I was doing. I was doing what my parents had done, mostly. And it worked. And that was about all I really cared about. It worked, and things went the way I wanted them. So what I share with you was not something, I didn't sit down and say, now let's see, how do you raise children? I didn't. I just looked back and it was working. And then, actually, when I got licensed was when I had to think about all this, because I was asked to do a series of talks. And what you're hearing today is basically what I did that first time. I just went and told some people, well, here's what I did, and this is how it worked. And that's when I had to start thinking about why, because then people did that awful thing, they asked me questions. And I thought, how do I explain what I did? So I began explaining it. And then I began to see why it made sense. And frankly, I am still learning. I have been teaching this for 17 years, and there are things that I talk about today that are recent discoveries of mine. I realize that they're the same as what I said originally, but it's just different ways of seeing it and different ideas and ways of expressing it. It's all the same stuff. That's why I say everybody knows this stuff. It isn't like I'm telling somebody something that they don't already know, but understanding it is not always the same as knowing it. So in communication, one of the first things that we want to do is make sure that the communication is effective. It isn't that you don't talk, it's that when you talk, you make sure that the child wants to pay attention to you. Now, the best way they're going to do that is if what you say and what you do are the same. It isn't that talk isn't worthwhile, it's that if the child sees that you say one thing and you do another, they will learn to ignore you. So saying and doing the same thing is what I talked about earlier when I said we're talking about do-do discipline. Depending upon what you do, or I'll put it this way, what you do will determine what your children will do. And if they know that you do what you say you'll do, then they will do what you tell them to do. So the talk is an important part of communicating, because in our species that's the way we transfer information. But it only is important if what you transfer is relevant. And that's where so many times we say things that aren't relevant, and the child knows it. And so what they do is they learn to ignore us. I had a situation, a family came in to see me. They had a daughter. Actually, they had 3 children. They had 2 boys. They had a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old boy and a 12-year-old daughter. And one of the things that we talked about when they came to see me was that the daughter was really the one who was giving them the most trouble. And she was pretty feisty. And they had a situation on Saturday mornings where each of the children had a room to clean. It was just part of Saturday morning chores. And so after breakfast, they would do that. And the girl had been assigned the bathroom that the 2 boys and she used, because she was the one who made the biggest mess in there. So they figured, well, if somebody's going to clean that room, might as well be her. And every morning at breakfast on Saturday, they'd finish, say, okay, go take care of, clean your rooms. This girl always gave him an argument. Always. It was just, that was the way it ran. So they get something like, go clean your room. Well, why do I have to do that? I don't think this, well, because everybody has to do a room. Well, it's not fair. Well, it's as fair as we can make it. Well, I don't see why I always have. And she would go on and on asking one question after another, and Mom would keep trying to answer them. Like, you know, as soon as she understands all this, then she'll say, thank you, Mom, for that very interesting conversation. I appreciate what you've said, and now I understand why I'm going to go clean the bathroom. No. She wanted to get out of it. She wasn't going to get out of it. But at least she was going to have a period of time there where she'd argue about it. And then finally, Dad or Mom would finally get fed up with it and just get in there and get that bathroom cleaned. And she'd have to go do it. But in the meantime, you see, she had punished her parents for making her do it. Because Mom was frazzled, and I mean really frazzled. She was honestly in a state about this. So I said, well, what do you want to do about it? Because one of the things would be just don't have them do the rooms. Because Mom was really concerned, and rightly so. And they said, well, we want to stop all of this hassle. So I said, okay, let's do this. I said, how many rooms do you have in the house? And they said, I think they had 13. I don't remember, but it didn't matter what the number. So anyway, I said 13. Okay, the 3 rooms they have to clean, that leaves you 10. I said, that's plenty of rooms. I said, here's what I want you to do. And this is what I often do. I will rehearse something ahead of time. Because it's no good to give somebody a piece of advice about what to do and not tell them that step 3, 4, and 5 are also part of this. Because they get through 1 and 2, and suddenly the child pulls step 3 on them, and they don't know where to go. So I said, okay, here's what you do. You make up in your mind a list of rooms. And Saturday morning, when this comes up, and you say, okay, kids, go clean your rooms, and she opens her mouth to start the argument. Why do I have to? You don't even let her get through the first sentence. You just look at her and say, you got the dining room. And she, why do I? You got the living room. You got the den. You got the kitchen. And you just keep giving her rooms. So you don't explain anything to her. Just start giving her rooms. I said, she's 12 years old. She's bright enough. She's going to figure out at some point that there's a connection between what's happening in her mouth. You want her to figure it out. See, problem solving for yourself. And the idea was that I don't want to have, if you had tried to explain it to her, what would have happened? They'd have had an argument. Don't get into an argument. The way to avoid an argument with her is do not argue about anything. Just give her the rooms. And keep giving her rooms until she quits. And they said, will it work? I said, I don't know, but let's try it. It's better than what you're doing now. Well, I didn't know it was better, but I said, you know, it's a change, if nothing else. And I really didn't know. I mean, I felt it would work, but I'd never done it before. I just said, well, let's give this a try. And so they did, and they came back. They were driving 100 to 300 miles round trip to see me. I mean, they were really serious about getting this solved. So they came back in 2 weeks. They weren't coming in every week. And I was seeing... So they came in, and I said, well, how'd it go? They'd had 2 Saturdays by that time. And he said, no problem. They said, well, the first Saturday was a problem, but this last Saturday wasn't. I said, well, tell me what happened. Just like they said, you know, it's time to go get your rooms cleaned. And it was, well, why do I have to? Well, you've got the dining room. You got the living room. And they gave her 3 rooms. And as she got the 3rd room, her eyes just bugged out, and her mouth dropped open, and it dawned on her what was happening. I'm getting a room every time I start to argue. And so she stopped, and she got up, and she went in and cleaned the bathroom. See, the problem was, the one thing that she could do, which was to talk to them about this, was the one thing that was getting her in trouble. We wanted to stop her feeling like she had an avenue through communication. That was what that was about. It was to stop the communication, not to get the bathroom cleaned up. It was to stop this arguing. So she did. She cleaned the bathroom. She came out and walked out, and they said, you know, don't forget the living room, or whatever the next one was. And she said, well, why did... And they said, you got 1 more. They gave her 1 more room like that. And she realized, from now on, I have no way to get at my parents about this, because every time I try to fight with them about it, I lose automatically. I don't even get, you know, there's no chance here. So she cleaned those 3 rooms. She cleaned the 4th room. She didn't say anything else because I don't want any more rooms. I told you, hey, I said, heck, if she has trouble learning this, you know, talk with the neighbors. See if she can use their house too. We'll give you enough rooms. We can do the whole neighborhood if you like, honey. How much is it going to take? So she, the next week, she didn't say a word when they said, go clean the rooms. She got up and went and did it. She wasn't real happy about it, but the idea wasn't how happy can we make her. It was how do we stop this argument every Saturday morning. Now, it happened that about 3 weeks later, she said something and got 1 room, and that was it. And that was the last time she ever did that. Now, I use that to point out to you that from her point of view, the argument was when she was in control. It was when she was winning. She ended up going to do the bathroom every week, but in the meantime, she had driven her parents nuts, and they were allowing it. Not because they wanted to, but because they didn't realize, what do we do instead? Communication. It's important, but sometimes it isn't what makes anything work. It's what you do that makes it work. So, that's what I call do-do discipline. I'll catch it at the end here. Okay. Yeah. Had a situation like that with my son. I came out one day. In fact, it's interesting. He was here just a minute ago. He delivered a clock. He's now this big and about 32 years old. But I came out one day on a Saturday morning. Everybody was gone except he and I. And we lived out, we had a little horse ranch, and it gets pretty dusty and dirty out there, and we had a large porch. It was, well, a large porch. It was 6 feet wide, 20 feet long down the front of the house, and 6 feet wide and 20 feet long down the side of the house. And I said, I'd like to have you sweep the porch. And I don't use their names anymore. I promised them that after they all turned 21. I said, I won't use your name. So I said, I'd like to have you sweep the porch. And his answer was, why do I have to do it? Now, you know, any parent instinctively knows that that is not a question. It's like when you ask them, why didn't you clean up your room? It's not a question. You know the child's going to argue with you, but I don't assume that that's really going to happen. I assume this is a legitimate question. The child really wants an answer. And so I gave him an answer. And the answer was, because I want it done now, and you're the only one home. Now, he asked why. Did I tell him why? Yeah, I gave him the answer. That should have taken care of it at that point. He said, oh, okay, fine, and out they do it. No, as soon as I said, because you're the only one home and I want it done now, and he said, but I did it last time. What do we got, folks? We got an argument. And I looked at him and I said, so? I looked around. No other children appeared. Now, in a magical state, as soon as he said, I did it last time, one of the other children should have magically appeared who says, I didn't do it last time, it's my turn. Nobody showed up. I was still stuck with my original answer. I wanted it done now, and he was still the only one there. My reason hadn't changed. And I was not about to argue with him about whether or not he had done it last time. I don't know whether he did or not. But it wasn't relevant. See, parents will get into arguing questions that aren't relevant. Didn't matter who did it last time. You're still the only one here, and I want it done now. You can take me to court later. And so I said, fine, you're still the only one here. I still want it done now. And he said, that's not fair. We're going to, if only did it last time doesn't work, let's try not fair. He said, it's not fair. And I said, it probably isn't. I wasn't going to disagree with him. See, I didn't need to argue that, but you're right, it's not fair. It's not fair at all. You are so right it's not fair, you ought to write your congressman about it. It is not fair, absolutely, I agree. I'll even sign an affidavit. I didn't need to argue that. It didn't change my point. He was still the only one there, and I wanted it done now. Now, suppose that instead of being honest, I hadn't thought it through. This is where it's important that we pay attention to what we say, folks. Suppose I had just said, well, it's your turn. He'd have had me. No, it's not my turn. See? And so it's important that you don't give kids anything other than the right answer, because if you give them your honest answer and then they point out something that could change that, then you say, well, on that basis, okay, we can change it. But nothing had changed. I still wanted it done now, and he was still the only one home. Now, he started to say something else, question 3, and I said, well, I'll talk to you about this when? Yeah, after you sweep the porch. Now, why did I do this? This is important. I don't want to argue with my kids. But if I don't want to argue with them, then I have to do something else that's very important. I have to be ready and willing to listen to them. So I was willing to listen. I just wasn't willing to listen if the only purpose was to get out of sweeping the porch. Because it was still going to be done. He could give me a dozen reasons. I could have said, you got any other reasons you'd like to offer right now? None of them was going to change the fact that he was the only one there unless the family drove in as he was talking. So I said, wait, we'll talk to you about it after you swept the porch. Now, if he has a real complaint like, Dad, I'm tired of always being the one here that gets tagged for this or whatever, then we could have discussed that. But if all he was trying to do was argue me in a position where I finally said, oh, all right, forget it, that wasn't going to work. So I let him know, if you really have a serious problem about this that goes beyond just not wanting to do it and trying to get out of it, come back and talk to me after you've done it, and I will be more than willing to sit down with you and work out whatever we need to work out. And I would do that. In fact, I remember one time my kids came to me and they said, Dad, we got a problem. And it was me. I said, okay, tell me about it. He said, well, sometimes on Friday, you will tell us you want something done on Saturday. And the problem is, they were getting up, they were mostly teenagers at that time, and they said, and the problem is we may have other plans. And we just would like to know sooner than Friday if we've got something to do on Saturday. I said, fair enough, you got it. And this was the deal, because you see, you can't make just an ironclad rule and say that's the way it is. I said, I will agree with you that if I do not discipline myself to ask you by Thursday to get something done on Saturday, then I might ask you on Friday. But it is up to you whether you want to. And you can say no. And my kids knew that I meant that they could say, no, Dad, I've got other plans. Because frankly, that was my problem. If I don't discipline myself to tell them by Thursday that I want it done on Saturday so they can plan for it, why should I expect them to change all their consequences around for me? That's not teaching them anything. That's teaching them, well, we have two sets of rules, the ones for you and the ones for me. No, we have the same set of rules for both of us, and I agree. Now, what it did was it eliminated arguments, because my kids knew they could come to me and they could talk to me about stuff, and I would listen. And by the way, I'm not going to deal with that here, but that is the answer to how you stop arguing. That's a little simplistic, and I do a whole nother seminar on that. But the problem is, in arguing, people want to be listened to. They want to be understood. And in an argument, people aren't listening. One author put it this way. He said, listen to the conversation between people and nations. It didn't matter whether it was two people or two nations. He said, it is a dialogue of the deaf. Isn't that a wonderful phrase? A dialogue of the deaf. Everybody's talking, nobody's listening. I don't want to understand you. I want you to shut up and understand me, because I'm brilliant and logical. And everything I say makes sense. And everything you say is idiotic and illogical and irrational and makes no sense. And as soon as you be quiet and listen to me, we'll solve this. Have you ever been in one of those arguments? So, you listen. what I did with my kids was I had a rule in our house which was everything is debatable but is not necessarily negotiable. And that means we can talk about anything. It doesn't necessarily mean I will change my mind. The decision-making and the understanding are two separate acts. See, with a lot of kids, they know if they can get you to the place where you will give in and talk to them about, they've got you about 90% of the way home to just caving in and letting them do it their way, or giving them what they want. And so they work toward that, and a lot of parents know that the battle is lost when they give in and listen. So they do everything to avoid the listening. No, you can't. Why not? Well, because. Your mind's like cement, all mixed up and permanently set, and don't bother me with the facts. And so the child knows that badgering and harassing in order to get you to talk to them is 90% of the victory. My kids never knew that. They knew that Dad will sit down and listen to them. But Dad will sit down and, let me underline that, listen to them. Because, you see, they don't want to hear me lecture them. For instance, your child says, well, I think I ought to be able to stay up later. My bedtime is, let's say, 9 o'clock now. I think I ought to be able to stay up till 10. You don't say, no, you can't stay up till 10, because you need to get up in the morning and you need your sleep, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Those may be wonderful reasons. They may be, every one of them may be excellent. The problem is your child doesn't want to hear it. So what I did, instead of me spending my time running my mouth trying to convince them how brilliant I was and how we ought to do it my way, which they didn't want to do, I said, okay, you tell me why it ought to be your way. And if you can sell me on it, you got it. And sometimes they could. So it was always debatable, but not necessarily negotiable. You tell me. And if you can convince me, okay, we'll do it. But if you can't, then who has been under all the pressure to prove their point? Me or my child? My child. You know, I ought to be able to stay up till 10 o'clock. Well, why? Well, because Harold gets to stay up till 10 o'clock. He does? Yeah. Your best friend? Yeah. The guy in your class, Harold? Yeah. He gets to stay up till 10? Yeah. Wow. Well, tell you what. Why don't you go down and talk to Harold's parents and see if they'll adopt you? And then you can live down there and you can stay up till 10 with Harold. But as long as you're living here, you're going to bed at 9. Because you got weird parents. Harold's got great parents, you got rotten parents. He did much better than you did. How come he got such good parents and I got such lousy parents? It's done in a draw. You just didn't luck out. I'm not going to argue. Now, most of what parents do when they are trying to persuade their child to either change their behavior, which is what we want, or persuading them that you can't change your behavior, which is what we don't want, the parent does all the talking. And that's why I just keep coming back to this idea. Be very, very careful about communication. Most of it isn't necessary. And believe me, I did not ignore my kids, and I wasn't the kind who wouldn't sit down and talk with them. I did. But the nice part of it was that they weren't always running away either. You go, oh, here comes Dad with another lecture. You know what that's like. I remember what it was like when my dad used to always say, if there's one thing you should remember, I could have written a book full of the one things I was supposed to remember. No, and the one I remember most, I mean, this, you really talk about what you say and what you do. The one that I remember best was about not smoking. And it always went like this. Now, you're going to have to kind of visualize a little bit here for me. My dad was a 3-pack-a-day smoker. And it went something like this. Son, if there's one thing you should remember, it's never start smoking. Hello? Hello? I mean, he always lit a cigarette in the middle of the explanation. Never stop smoking. Right, Dad. Never start smoking. I didn't smoke, neither do my kids, but no, didn't make any sense. I just looked at it and said, no sense paying attention to him. If he smokes, I better not do whatever he does because it doesn't make sense. Okay. I mean, you can come out with two outcomes no matter what it is. All right. One other thing. I said I was talking about listening to a child. Oh, this is interesting. Because the one who was just here and delivered the clock is the same one that did this. He came to me. He wanted a motorcycle. Well, I'll give a little bit away here. His initials are RPM. And boy, from the time he was tiny, they fit. He did everything at full tilt. I remember he used to go charging down the hall and miss the door going into the living room. Bam! He just did everything. This kid could wear out a pair of tennis shoes sitting in a chair. So anyway, first he wanted a little bicycle, you know, dirt bike, and then he graduated to motorized things. He wanted something with a motor on it. And we lived out in the country, and actually it made sense because he could get back and forth to town without going on the roads. He could go in over the hills right in downtown where all his friends were. We were isolated, and he wasn't old enough to drive, and that meant for him to get back and forth, he had to get somebody to drive him into town. So having a dirt bike made a lot of sense, but I also knew that having a dirt bike meant, you know, losing your front teeth and cracking your skull doing some crazy thing. And so I was against him, and I just always said no. And then we moved from that to having a motorcycle. And each time we'd sit down and we'd talk about this, but I would listen, and I would listen to his reasons. And I didn't tell him his reasons were not good reasons, for two reasons. First of all, they were good reasons. But second of all, even if they aren't good reasons, do you realize that every one of your reasons is a good reason for you? All reasons come out of one pot called good reasons. If you want, you know the difference between a reason and an excuse? A reason is my point of view, an excuse is your point of view. That's how you define it. It's real simple. All reasons come out of the same pot. So, what happens? Well, he gives me his reasons, and they're good reasons, like I wouldn't have to wait for a ride, and you wouldn't have to drive me, and you know, all these things. So I didn't argue with him about them. They were right. And I could say, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right. Then we get to decision making. And I say, I still am not ready to let you have a motorcycle because, what was my reason? I feel they aren't safe. And you see, none of his reasons contradicted my reason. And I didn't choose that reason because he couldn't contradict it. I chose that reason because that was what I truly believe. I have a friend who has a son with one foot missing because he went through an intersection and a driver didn't see him and hit him on a motorcycle. And when you're in a car, they hit the car first and you second. When you're on a motorcycle, they hit you first and the motorcycle second. He lost his foot. And I just didn't want my son going around on one foot because he's a four-letter athlete and you know, he skis and does everything else. He wasn't going to have a lot of trouble on one foot. So I said no. But I always had the same reason. And I never told him his reasons were wrong. Because they weren't. For him, they were his reasons. Every one of you had a reason for being here. Do you know what? It's not all the same reason. But it's your reasons. And for you, they're the right reasons. They are good reasons. So I never told him he was wrong. But one time he came in, and we'd have this talk probably about every 6 months. And I say, you know, come on back anytime you want to. And we would, and he'd sit down and he'd say, Dad, I really think I ought to be able to have a motorcycle because, and we'd go through whatever. Sometimes he'd have some new ideas on it. And they were good ideas. Thinking and problem solving for yourself. He did a good job of it. And we were going through this, and he was about 17. He's just around 17 at that time. And had been driving a car for about a year. Not his car, one of ours, but he understood a whole lot more, I felt, about how dangerous motorcycles were. Because once you're out there and you realize sometimes you don't see them, you begin to recognize some of the problems with it. So I said, okay. I said, if you want a motorcycle, go ahead and get it. Now, a couple of things important in that. What was my reason for telling him no? I felt they were unsafe. I didn't change my opinion. I still think they're unsafe. Don't ask me to get on one. But I felt that he was responsible and self-disciplined and mature enough to decide this for himself, even though I didn't agree with it. So I said, if you want one, you can get one. But at the same time, I could turn around to his 13-year-old brother and say, don't even think about it. Because my reasons hadn't changed. Now he could come to me and say, Dad, you know, if he's got one, why can't I have one? And a lot of parents would be in a real bind because the reasons they had given was, well, we couldn't afford it or whatever. Wrong reasons. Make sure you know what your reasons are. So I could say, yeah, your brother can have one, and when I feel that you understand the dangers and are responsible enough to handle them, I'll tell you the same thing. But in the meantime, if you want to come talk to me about it, come on. And we'll go through it with you for the next 4 years. Now, a lot of parents would find themselves in a real bind saying yes to one child and no to another because they hadn't thought through their position and they hadn't let the child discuss it with them. Because works great with a small child, but like you pointed out earlier, there are times when you need to explain to the child more than that. And I think it's important at a time like that. But don't do it first. Let them talk to you first. If they want to hear your explanation afterwards, that's fine. But if they don't, that's okay. You say, no, I'm sorry, you can't have a motorcycle. Why not? Well, because, I'm not interested. Fine, goodbye. We don't need to carry on this conversation. You don't have to stay here and listen to me. I've listened to you, and I've made the decision, and I'm perfectly happy if you don't feel that you want to hear why you've been told no. How many of us want to hear why we've been told no? I mean, how many of us, if something's going to happen, we want to hear the discussion too? I remember years ago being stopped by a highway patrolman and given a ticket, and he was giving me a lecture at the same time on speeding. And I thought, you know, I really like, if I could take a vote here, I'd like, look, one or the other. Let's, if you're going to give me the ticket, forget the lecture. But if you give me the lecture and not the ticket, I'll be happy to sit through it. I know a lot of kids would be happy to do that, so, you know, I'll do it. Okay. Just remember that when you argue with a child, the point at which they decide that they've won isn't at the end, isn't at the outcome. When you argue with them, they feel that sense of power that they are controlling what's going on because they got you into an argument with them, and they are in charge. And if you stop and think about it, they are. You're arguing on their turf. Who's in charge? Who got us into this? That girl who would not clean the bathroom without the argument, who was running the argument? She was. And from her point of view, every Saturday, I win. And of course, there were other areas where when she argued, she did get what she wanted. So the idea of getting into the argument, forcing them to do it on my terms, on the terms where I have a chance of winning, that's the essence of winning for them. You got to see it from their point of view. Okay, you'll notice in your notes, and by the way, some of you may have noticed that I put a little introduction to that, which says, don't look at your notes as though they are an outline for the talk. The problem with that is I never know what the talk's going to be. It's very hard to write an outline for a talk that you haven't heard yet. You know, sometimes, well, I won't say I'm fascinated to hear what I have to say, but I don't. Anyway, what I said was that there are things in here that you can then take back and use. And you'll notice in there that there are two things I mentioned. One is the 7 sins, and they are nagging, arguing, lecturing, yelling, threatening, criticizing, and pleading. And they all have something in common, and this is why I call them the 7 sins. They all pass judgment. Now, when you get into the cracks, which is the other thing, you'll see that the cracks really do pass judgment. and in a very specific way. And I'm not going to go into a lot of that because you have in your notes. But the 7 sins also pass judgment in that what they do is they decide who is going to be in control, and the child is going to have to put up with you that way. And that just isn't good, because the child will fight with you and resist on that basis. The biggest problem with the 7 sins is that they don't accomplish anything on their own. It's like, I had a mother, we were doing a talk like this, and she said she had 2 sons and a daughter, and the daughter had to do housework, and the boys didn't. And this was just kind of the way their family has always been. The boys, the girls had to work and help clean the house, but the boys never did. And it's been the same in Dad's house and Mom's house and everything, so this was the way it was. And she was talking to me about this, and I said, well, what's the problem? She said, well, her daughter keeps complaining to her about how unfair this is. And I said, okay. And so she said, well, what should I do? And I said, agree with her. She's right. And she looked at me. I said, it's unfair. But if that's the way you're going to do it, just tell her, yeah, you're right, honey, it is unfair. The boys don't have to, and you do, and that's the way we do it in our house. And I said, I don't see that you've got any better position than that. I can't think of any other rationale for why you should and they shouldn't. It's just a matter of that's the way we do it. So I said, admit it to her. Tell her, yeah, you're right, it's unfair. Sorry, go do the dishes. So the 7 sins, as I say, just what they do is they create a lot of unnecessary time and effort, and that's their biggest fault from your point of view in terms of how efficiently you get the job done. The cracks, as I said, all pass judgment, and I will go through them quickly. That is questions that aren't questions, like, why didn't you clean up your room? You know, they end with a question mark, but they don't really. If you look at them in terms of the content, they end with an exclamation mark. And what they say is somebody's in trouble. I mean, if you really want to, how about, why didn't you clean up your room like I told you to? You know, that's a question. And kids know it's not a real question. What are the 2 answers you get from kids? Oh, no. Or I forgot. That's it. Oh, no, I forgot. Standard question. Standard answer. So, you don't ask questions that aren't questions. And it doesn't have to start with a why, but most of them start with why. What did you do that for can be the same sort of thing. You don't really want an answer. So don't ask questions you don't want an answer to. The second one is ridicule. The third one is accusations. The fourth is criticism, complaints, and sarcasm. And every one of these, in one way or another, passes judgment because it tells somebody else that they are wrong. When you pass judgment on somebody, when somebody judges you, what's the first thing you want to do? Even if you are wrong, what's the first thing you want to do? What do we do in a court of law? We present a defense. Okay? I want to explain myself. I want you to what? Understand me. What are arguments about? Arguments about wanting to be understood. So the minute you use a crack, it's a guaranteed argument starter. You have just put the other person in the position where they have to do one of 2 things: default or defend themselves. Now, kids know better. They know there's no place to go with those things, so they just, no, I forgot, no. Grown-ups forget that. Yeah. Somebody comes in, they were supposed to be here 3 hours ago, and they just show up. I say, where you been? Like you really cared. So they tell you, why didn't you call? Do you really care why they didn't call? No, you're trying to let them know, I've been here for 3 hours waiting for you. I didn't know where you were. I didn't know what was going on, and you didn't call, and you are in trouble. But you know what an adult will do? They'll give you an answer. Well, I was busy, no, as though you really wanted to know. Kids know better. Just one thing that your kids do better. Next time somebody asks you why you didn't, you just say, oh, no. Get it over with right there. Okay, questions?
I have a question. When you were going back to the girl that had to do the homework or housework on Saturday morning,
yeah,
Okay, I would argue that she still can control the situation because you can give someone every room in the house to clean, but I'm going to clean it the way I want it cleaned, not the way you want it cleaned.
Okay.
Therefore, I still control the situation, so how would you react to that?
Oh, well, I have an answer for that, and that's, honey, did you get the bathroom done? Yeah, Mom. Well, there are a few things you didn't do, and so what I'd like you to do is go back in there and practice doing it right. What? Practice. Go back and do the bathroom again. Practice. You obviously need practice. I went and looked at it. You need practice. And I'll give you as much practice as you need. Now, if it's going to take you the rest of the day to practice, that's okay. Now, I say that because there are a lot of situations. I'm going to give you a couple where that fits. But if a child decides, well, I will not do it your way, let me point out there is another issue involved, and that is that we're talking about two things. One is getting the child to the point where they understand that when I say it, I want you to do it. See, and I'm talking about parents who are at the point where getting the job done anyway, good, bad, or indifferent, is the problem. Getting it done correctly hasn't even come up yet. So in this case, I suggest split it into two issues, and I'll give you an illustration of that right now with a family. I had a mother who had 3 kids, and she used to have them clean up their rooms. But the problem was sometimes they do it the way she wanted, sometimes they didn't, and it just bothered her. And sometimes she just wanted them to kind of go in and tidy it up. Other times she wanted that thing spit and polish. You know, General Patton will be here in a half hour, and anybody who doesn't pass dies. And so we talked about this, and it turned out there were three levels of what she wanted in the room. And I said, okay, here's what you do. You go to the trouble, because these were teenagers. You write down what you want for each of those, and you label them Code 1, Code 2, and Code 3. And then you tell them, today I want a Code 2. And they can go in and check on the wall everything that's on the Code 2. And then if they do everything that's on a Code 2, then that was what I asked for. So I've at least gotten to the point where they are living up to the measured expectation. Now, if they do it in a sloppy way, then I go back to, honey, you need some practice. Go back and do it a little better. And I will send them back as many times as it takes for them to decide, I better do it your way because this isn't getting me what I want. See, what you're talking about is a child being able to say, ha, 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 no consequence. And I say, ha, 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 wrong. Go back and do it again. How many times? Beats me. I don't know how many times it'll take. I had 2 of my kids. I may go over this again later because I think it's, I never know what's going to come out. 2 of mine, we used to rotate the dishes with 5 of them. And we lived in a house for a while that didn't have a dishwasher. And so, well, we had 5 dishwashers, but we didn't have the kind that you turn on and leave it. And so they rotated the dishes. You wash one day, you dry, then you're off for 3, you wash, you dry, you're off, you wash, you dry. And I had 2 that always squabbled. And this is one of the things I present as an issue about thinking and problem solving. We'll probably get back to this one again. Thinking and problem solving. How do I get this solved? Well, most parents would say, separate the kids. And you see, that is a good answer. There's nothing wrong with that answer at all. But my idea was, I don't want to just solve the problem, I want to get them to solve the problem. Because I already know how to solve problems. I want them to learn how to solve problems. The only way I'm going to do that is to somehow do it in a way that causes them to have to do it rather than me. So what I did was I went out one night when the 2 of them were squabbling, and I said, hey, you 2, you got a problem doing the dishes without squabbling. So, got a new deal for you. From now on, whenever you do the dishes, if you squabble, you're going to do them again the next night. And that's what's going to happen now. You squabble, you're going to do them again tomorrow night. And you're going to keep doing them every night until you learn to do them without squabbling. Because obviously what you need is practice learning to do it without squabbling. And I'll give you all the practice you need. You can take it for the next 6 months. I'm sure your brothers and sisters will not argue with you about that. You can have it for as long as you want. How long do you think it took them to learn to do it without squabbling? One night. Because they didn't want to. Now, some things aren't that easy. Some things may require a little bit more work on your part to get it to the point where it's the way you want it. But that was just a matter of, it's up to you. I will deal with one more on this, not this time, but I will deal with one more on this to give you another example of how you get the child motivated to learn to do it your way and do it that way, and not do it some other way. Because as long as you are in a position where your child still has some needs must be met by you, you've got some power with them, some control. So this sort of thing can even be done with a teenager. And I will illustrate a case in point later on. But I hope that kind of gives you an answer to it. It is an important question, and I say think of them as two questions. That's the best way to do it. One is getting them to understand that if I say clean your room, that means clean your room. That doesn't mean forget about it for 3 weeks. But the other is also there are some certain expectations I have about it when you do it. And I would say you get this one established first. You get the child to pay attention to you. Pay attention to me, I mean what I say. If I say clean it every day, you clean it every day. Once I've established that, and it only takes a few weeks for a child to get the point that around here things have changed. And once you've established that, then you can say, by the way, there are a couple of things that I expect that I notice you're not doing. And then you begin to fine-tune it. But all of us have to learn, tasks. And they're no different. But the learning of the task is not the same as getting to do it, because if they don't do it, they sure aren't going to learn it. So separate it into two things. Get this part done first. And if your child already is the kind who doesn't argue with it, they pay attention and do what you want, then focus on two. I've already got this one done. Now, there are a couple of things I'd like you to do better. And it can be very benign. I had one parent came in, she said, clean up a room, in fact. And she had listened to the seminar we'd done. And she said, I used your suggestion. I went by and checked the room and came out and told my son, you did a nice job in your room, and as soon as your jacket is off the floor and on a hook, it'll be done. And it was a nice way of saying, get in there and get your jacket off the floor, for crying out loud. Or the kid that walked across the room, his jacket was laying on the floor. And he kept going back. He'd gone over that thing about 6 times, and the mother finally said, pick that up. And he looked at her and said, what? You see it. It doesn't exist. It's on the floor. I would separate the two and then see which do I need to deal with. If you need to deal with both, first get their attention, then teach them what you want them to know.